deep in the ancient spine of the Appalachians, where mist clings like ghostly breath. Some truths are too terrifying to speak aloud. Tonight we share 3 real encounters that defy reason. If the woods outside your window seem too still tonight, you've been warned. Caleb Jenkins never questioned the old rule, passed down through generations: never answer the woods after sundown. Folks in Mason Hollow didn't need a reason, you just didn't. But on January 12th, 1998, 17-year-old Caleb broke that vow. The night had been bitter, the kind of cold that turned breath into fog and made wood crack like gunshots. Caleb was curled under wool blankets in the loft when the creak of the stairs woke him. Then his mother's whisper followed, trembling. "Ruth's turning blue," she said. Her eyes were wide, wet, and terrified. Grandma Ruth lived 2 hollers over, tucked between Saddleback Ridge and the stretch folks called Whisper Creek. There were no roads, just a deer path through bare woods and snowdrifts. Caleb's father was out on the mine's night shift, and someone had to go fetch Doc Miller. Without a word, Caleb grabbed his father's .22 rifle, threw on his boots, and stepped into the dark. The trees looked like bones, black and brittle. His flashlight beam barely cut the thick woods. Each step crunched the frozen ground, echoing too loud in the silence. The moon was thin, a sliver of dull white behind torn clouds. Caleb muttered to himself as he trudged on. Ain't nothing out here but deer and cold. But deep down, he remembered the stories, the wheezing ones, folks called them. Spirits that mimicked kin, lured people off the path. Don't listen, don't follow, his grandma had once warned with a shaking voice, even if it sounds like me. About halfway through the hollow, just past the leaning oak where the ground dipped near the creek, he heard it. A voice, low, wet, and rasping from the pines to his left. "Caleb, help me, child." He froze. It sounded exactly like Grandma Ruth. Same tone, same frail wheeze, same Appalachian lilt that softened his name. But her cabin was straight ahead. He raised the rifle, heart pounding. The darkness near the creek shifted. Pine branches bent like something large was moving through. And then she stepped out. At least, it looked like her. Silver hair, pale nightgown, thin arms spread wide like she wanted a hug, but her eyes, they were black. Not just dark, empty. Like someone had scooped out her soul and left tar behind. "Come give Grandma a kiss," it wheezed. It smiled. Its jaw cracked sideways as it did, far too wide. That's when Caleb saw its feet, bare, and twisted backwards in the snow. Toes pointed the wrong way, as if it had walked out of hell the wrong direction. He let out a choked scream. The thing lunged. He ran. The woods exploded behind him, branches snapping, snarling breath in his ears. It wasn't human. It moved wrong, fast and heavy, like a bear on 2 legs. The trees themselves seemed to bend to let it through. He didn't look back, just ran. The rifle bounced against his chest as he tore through the snow, lungs screaming. The only light came from flickering clouds and the faint, warm glow from Doc Miller's house ahead. He hit the porch hard, banging on the door with his fists, shouting incoherent words. Doc Miller flung it open in his nightshirt, lantern held high. What in God's name? Caleb collapsed, sobbing, blood on his knuckles, snow stuck in his hair. It took 3 men, Doc, his son Charlie, and Sheriff Dunley, to go back with him at first light. The sun cast a weak orange light across the holler. They found only 1 set of tracks in the snow. Caleb's. The thing, whatever it had been, left no sign. But there was one last horror. Ruth Jenkins had died in her bed sometime during the night. Her mouth was open like she'd been calling out. The doctor checked her lungs. "Perfectly intact," he muttered, pale. "No sign of fluid. She didn't drown. She didn't suffocate. She just stopped." They buried her 2 days later. The whole town showed, but Caleb stood alone on the hilltop, refusing to look toward Whisper Creek. He never told the full story, not to his mother, not to the sheriff. But he stopped hunting after that, wouldn't set foot in the woods, even in daylight. "It knew my name," he whispered once to Doc Miller years later. "It wore her face, her voice, but it wasn't her." Some say the wheezing ones come when death is near. They call from the holler, wearing the voices of the dying. If you answer, if you step off the path, they take you too. And even now, when the moon is thin and the trees creak just right, folks swear they hear a voice in the dark. "Caleb." But Caleb never answered again.
Lena Graham was used to skepticism. As a graduate student researching Appalachian folk magic, she often found herself laughed out of academic circles. So when she mentioned her intention to find the so-called Devil's Chapel, her advisor chuckled and told her to bring back a souvenir. But Lena wasn't chasing ghost stories. She had read the oral histories. She'd studied handwritten journals passed down through generations, scraps of testimony about a church deep in the West Virginia wilderness near a stretch of land called Dead Man's Creek. No one had documented its exact location. All she knew was that it was built in 1908, had no steeple, no crosses, and supposedly no god. She rented a Jeep with off-road tires and drove through the winding mountain roads. Asphalt gave way to gravel, then dirt, and finally a mossy, rutted trail barely wide enough for the vehicle. The sun had already begun to dip when she passed the third broken gate. A rusted warning sign clung to a tree on the left. "Turn back." The forest grew strange around her. Not just darker, but heavier, as though the air had gained weight. Birds fell silent. Even the insects seemed to pause. She drove on. And then she saw it. The church stood in a hollow surrounded by black pine trees, almost invisible until she was directly in front of it. The structure was little more than a decaying box of rotted oak boards and a roof that slouched to one side like a drunk collapsing in prayer. There were no windows, no steeple, just a door, split down the middle and warped with age. What stopped her cold were the carvings. Etched into the door were inverted pentagrams. Below them, a phrase she didn't recognize, like the gouged scrawl of some ancient script. She took a photo and made a mental note to cross-reference it later. Only much later would she learn it was Old Enochian, a language often associated with angelic communication. But this phrase translated roughly to, "God does not see us here." She reached out and pushed the door open. Inside, the air was unbreathable. Thick and sour, it stung her nose with the twin stench of copper and spoiled milk. Her flashlight beam barely penetrated the gloom, bouncing off dust so dense it looked like underwater fog. The pews, most half-eaten by rot, faced a stone altar at the front. It was dragged, unpolished, and deeply stained with something dark and reddish-brown. Then she saw them. Dozens of dolls nailed to the wooden walls, some made of corn husks, others with animal teeth sewn into their limbs. They had button eyes and twisted yarn mouths. All of them were positioned to face the altar in the center of the room. And one had hair that looked exactly like hers. Black yarn with red-dyed tips. She took a step forward before realizing what she was doing. Her hand reached out, fingertips brushing against the husk of that eerie doppelganger. Then came the slam. The heavy wooden door behind her crashed shut with unnatural force, sending a shock through her chest. She froze. The flashlight flickered and died. Her breath caught in her throat. From above, somewhere in the rafters, came a sound, a whisper. No, more like a clicking, guttural rasp. It didn't speak in any language she knew, but the meaning settled deep in her bones. Stay for the sermon. Panic took over. She bolted for the door, slamming her body against it again and again until the ancient wood split with a loud crack. She stumbled into the night air and sprinted to her Jeep, heart hammering against her ribs. When she fumbled with the keys, she made the mistake of looking back. Through the slots in the warped wood, she saw figures inside the church. Tall, emaciated, wrong. Their heads tilted at impossible angles like birds with broken necks. And all of them were watching her. She didn't stop driving until she reached Elkins, a nearby town, hours later. She checked into a roadside motel under a fake name and immediately stripped off her clothes, tossing them into the shower where she doused them with bleach and scalding water. The scent from the church still clung to her skin, like rusted metal and bile. The next morning, her phone wouldn't turn on. The backup driver she'd stored photos and voice notes was corrupted. Her DSLR still had images from the trip, trees, roads, sky, but every picture of the church itself was distorted. Some were nothing but static. Others contained what looked like stretched faces, long and distorted as though caught mid-scream. Only the audio recorder had survived. When she played it back, the beginning sounded normal. Her voice narrating observations, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, but near the end, a low frequency emerged. Static. Then something else. A voice. Not hers. We know your name now. She left town the same day, moved 3 states away, deleted every account tied to her identity, and switched academic departments, giving up on the thesis altogether. But the church hadn't forgotten her. In her new apartment, the walls sometimes vibrated, softly, just before dawn, a humming sound, low and metallic. She took to sleeping with the lights on. And the dreams? In her dreams, she walks back into the church. The dolls still hang from the walls, only now there are more of them. New ones, all with red-tipped black hair. All watching her. Local records confirmed that Dead Man's Creek exists. In 1972, a park ranger went missing near the area. His last radio transmission described an old structure that doesn't belong. No official search found anything. A folklorist named Ruth Pendleton once wrote in her private journal about the church without a cross, a place built by a heretic sect who believed that true worship came not from submission to heaven, but from communion with what lies beneath. They fled cities and towns deep into the woods, to a place they claimed God could not see. But hell sees everything.
Our final story comes from a trucker named Ben Calhoun, a man who once hauled coal across the back roads of Appalachia. This entry is pieced together from a voice memo he left at 4:07 a.m. in a police report filed hours later. Ben was a quiet man, Army vet, kept mostly to himself, but every driver in the southern route of the Appalachian corridor knew him. Reliable, unshakable, until the night he rolled into Cooper's Rock Tunnel and came back a different man. It was December 18th, 2023. A brutal cold front had swept across Virginia and eastern Tennessee. Snow fell sideways, thick and fast, like someone shaking out white bedsheets across the highway. Most rigs had pulled over hours earlier, waiting out the storm at fuel stops and roadside diners. Not Ben. He had one more load, coal for a processing plant in Cumberland, and he figured if he cut through Clinch Mountain using the Cooper's Rock Tunnel, he could shave off 2 hours. It wasn't just about time. Ben liked to move. Stopping made him think. Thinkin' made him remember. The entrance to the tunnel loomed like a mouth,
black and still, with a rusted overhead sign that flickered dimly. No stopping, no exceptions. Every trucker who'd run that route knew the unwritten rule. You don't stop inside Cooper's Rock Tunnel. Not for a piss, not for a smoke, not even if you hit something. Ben remembered laughing at that old superstition years ago. Now he wasn't so sure. As he rolled in, the blizzard outside vanished behind him like a curtain falling. Concrete swallowed the snow. For a moment, all was quiet, just the steady hum of tires and the rhythm of Ben's breathing. Then, halfway through that mile-long throat of stone, it all stopped. The headlights flickered once, then went out. The engine coughed, spat, died. Darkness swallowed the cab like ink. Ben's first thought was mechanical failure. He reached for his CB radio. Nothing. Dead. He checked his phone. No signal. Then the temperature dropped. Not cold like winter, cold like meat locker cold, graveyard cold. And then he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Faint, metallic, coming from the driver's window. He froze, the kind of stillness where your breath doesn't even fog up the glass. His fingers twitched toward the dome light. No power. The tapping came again, then a scratching. Slow, deliberate, like nails being dragged across rusted sheet metal. Ben squinted through the window. There, just inches away from his face, was a hand. Not a normal hand. Bone-thin, gray as ash, the skin cracked and peeling like sun-baked paint. Fingernails long and yellow, curling like claws. Then it moved. The hand cupped the glass, and something leaned in. "Open up," it hissed. The voice was like gravel in a blender, wet and broken like it hadn't been used in decades. And as it spoke, the smell hit him. Sulfur. Rot. Something worse beneath. Ben recoiled. Then came more. Hands. 4, 6, a dozen. Slapping the cab, climbing onto the hood, pale figures crawling like spiders, naked, hairless, slicked with something dark. He could see their faces now. No eyes, just empty sockets, oily blackness seeping from them like tar. Their mouths were too wide, grinning with needle-sharp teeth that never stopped moving. Ben screamed, fumbled the key, jammed it into the ignition, turned. Nothing. Again. Click. Nothing. The things outside were whispering now, dozens of them, moaning, hissing, scraping their nails along the metal like they were writing something. Ben slammed his fist against the dashboard. "Come on! Come on!" One last turn of the key, and the engine roared life like it had been asleep under ice. Lights blazed, and for one blinding second, he saw all of them. The tunnel lit up in a brief, ghastly theater. Figures clinging to walls, crawling along the ceiling, some fused with the concrete like tumors with limbs. Black ichor dripped from their jaws as they shrieked in rage at the light. Ben floored it. The rig fishtailed, tires screaming against the concrete as he blasted through the remaining tunnel. The creatures gave chase, their screams like broken flutes, fading as the exit drew near. And then, moonlight. Fresh snow. Air. Ben shot out of the tunnel like a bullet. His rig didn't stop for another 5 miles. When he finally pulled over in a gas station parking lot, shaking and drenched in sweat, he stepped out and checked the trailer. Clawed to hell. Gouges deep as fingers, black stains like scorched tar, and the smell. Sulfur. Rotten meat. And something else. Something old. The next morning, still wired and mumbling, Ben stumbled into a diner off Route 19. The cook, a weathered old man named Cecil, took one look at him and poured a free coffee. "You went through Cooper's last night, didn't ya?" Ben just nodded, too stunned to speak. Cecil leaned over the counter and said something Ben never forgot. "Those weren't ghosts. They ain't demons neither. They're older than all that. The keepers. They guard the mountain's belly. You were dinner." Ben Calhoun quit trucking the next day, sold his rig, moved south. Folks say he sleeps with every light on. Neighbors claim he hasn't spoken a word about what happened since, except for one time, when the power flickered during a storm. He whispered, "Don't stop. Never stop in the dark." And then he locked himself in the basement for 3 days. The Appalachians breathe with the weight of centuries. The dirt remembers things carved into it by fire and bone. The old roads wind through places better left unmapped. And the tunnels? They're not always empty. So if you ever drive through Clinch Mountain at night, keep your engine running. Keep your lights on. And if you hear tapping on the glass, don't look.